Svelte Radio podcast. This week we have a special guest here, but first let's introduce ourselves. So I'm Kevin. I run a site called Svelte School, which has a number of different Svelte tutorials, pretty much.
Hey everyone, this is Sean. I have not been doing a lot of Svelte recently just because I've been trying to pay down my debt on the AWS side of things. I'm still kind of ramping up on AWS stuff. Right now, we're in the middle of a conference that we're hosting for ourselves called Amplify Days. So that should be out if anyone's interested in sort of being full stack front end type person.
Cool. Hi, I'm Anthony. I'm a Svelte maintainer. I'm the CTO of Beyonc, which is a booking platform for activity providers. And I'm also heavily involved in various open sourcey things at the moment.
Right. Cool. And then for today, we have a special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Rich. I do graphics at the New York Times. I wrote the first version of Svelte, and then I tricked a bunch of people into helping me maintain it.
That's great.
Hey,
Cool.
Awesome. So this is like an unusual episode, right? Because obviously we have a special guest here. I guess so. We have some topics pre-prepared. We tweeted out some questions about what people want to know. But I guess just to like kind of kick things off, we should probably talk about the big front end masters workshop that was like maybe 4 weeks ago. Still a big deal. I mean, we I think all of us like sat through the live stream of it, and that was a marathon run by Rich. I just want to ask Rich, like, how do you feel about that?
Oh God, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, honestly. I'd never done a workshop before. I went into it a little bit wet behind the ears, and I over prepared in all the wrong ways. I didn't really know what I was doing, and so it turns out I prepared about 3 days worth of material, because I was panicking that I wouldn't be able to fill a full day of teaching people about Svelte. So it's like, the first 45 minutes, we're going to go through the tutorial, and then we're going to spend the morning building a little app. And then in the afternoon, we're going to build a big Sapper app with, progressive enhancement, and it's going to talk to APIs, and it's going to have a database and authentication and all of this stuff. And like at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm less than halfway through, and I'm like, oh God, no, I've done this horribly wrong. But I trust the front end masters people to edit it into something usable, because they know what they're doing. So that should be coming out pretty soon, I think.
What's also interesting is that the stuff you used for it, for part of it, was pretty green to you as well. And so it was almost you learning all these different technologies that had come out, and then just building apps in them and teaching to build apps in them, which is impressive.
It's true. I owe you a debt of gratitude for the recommendations that you provided when I showed up in our chat one day and said, what would you use if you were going to teach people how to do authentication and this, that, and the other? So yeah, we used I used Auth0 and Fauna and a couple of other things deployed on Vercel, but then we actually never got to that part of the workshop. So that's probably going to form like an intermediate Svelte workshop at some point in the future. Going through all of that stuff.
So is that something they're interested in?
It's something that was sort of talked about informally. No commitments yet, but
right. Yeah.
But yeah, at some point, I think the idea is that we're going to get Sapper to a 1.0. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point during this podcast. I don't know. And then there'll perhaps be an appetite for like more training materials around Sapper, because at the moment the documentation around Sapper isn't quite as comprehensive as it is for Svelte, and so. There's a bit of a gap for useful training materials there, probably.
Well, it sounds like you'll be back. We have Sapper on the list, round about there. Yeah, there you go. But no, I think it was a great event. I think it's kind of a coming of age for Svelte. It's kind of how I guess like a rite of passage as for all front end frameworks that their creators say something about it on front end masters. And Mark has always said that he's very sort of picky about who he lets on as instructors. So I think this was at least like probably a good entry point for a lot of people, for people who are like thinking about Svelte, and they want to see a lot of like training out there, even though like a lot of this actually you could kind of like figure it out yourself on the site, but it's good to have a workshop that just kind of goes through it.
Yeah, I think actually that's the part that I didn't really appreciate going into it. Was I'm there thinking that I've got to provide some real value here. I'm being invited on front end masters. That's like a big deal. So I've got to prepare all this material, but actually what people care about is just sort of being guided through the existing training material and coming out at the back of that feeling confident that they've understood it.
Yeah, and having the chance to ask you questions as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is also nice.
I think it really shows like how good the tutorial actually is on the website.
I actually discovered a couple of times as I was going through that tutorial in the workshop that some of the steps had changed since I last looked at the tutorial. And so I like get to the next stage, like with an idea in my head about what I was going to say. And then it's, I don't remember this. So that was fun. It was a bit seat in the pants.
This is good though. This is interesting because it's quite hard to build a community of developers who will continue your work with you. I think it's probably one of the hardest things about open source projects. A lot of them end up with a single maintainer or the original author. But you've actually got this bunch of people contributing, which is impressive.
It's something that I'm extremely happy about and grateful for, because like it's no big secret that I haven't been very heavily involved in open source this year for a variety of reasons. And if that had happened like a year or two ago, the Svelte project would have died in its crib. But now there's a very healthy team of people that like I have no qualms about delegating all of the authority that I may have once had to the people in the core team, which isn't to say that like I don't want to still be very heavily involved in the project. I do. I'm itching to get back into it, but it makes me feel very good about the health of the project.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We should talk briefly about that, because I never got that onto the agenda. But I think something that I was very keen about from basically the beginning was, Svelte in order to get to the next level, I think it had to evolve in terms of its governance. And I think now there's like this maintainers call, and there's some form of regular cadence around reviews and sort of big ticket items that may actually need more than a day's work of just of pushing through. How's that changed, and what's your thinking around that?
Well, so the fact that we had the first ever maintainers call, when was it? A few weeks ago. I guess we're due for a new one very soon. That's a real milestone. I think that was actually the first time that we'd all got on a video chat together and talked about stuff. And we spent a long time talking about slots, because Tanley Howe's done a lot of work around fixing some of the rough edges around slots. And then we talked about a few other things, but a lot of it was sort of meta procedural stuff about how we as a team organize ourselves in order to make some of these big ticket items happen and not just constantly get buffeted around by the GitHub issue noise. And I think we came up with some pretty good processes around that. I'm pretty optimistic.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think some the other thing that Svelte Society probably can do a bigger part of is kind of the marketing of Svelte. I don't even know how many minor releases that Svelte has had, but some like every minor release is a marketing event potentially, which used to be a bigger deal for React. Like, oh, it's like a new version. Like everyone, it's an event for people to learn about what's been added and what's changed. But we don't necessarily have that. We just have the major version, and that's like a meatier thing. And sometimes we might want to do more blogging or just releases.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Yeah.
I mean, the problem with all of this is that it takes time, right?
It does.
And everyone is busy. So
sure.
it is what it is.
But we are focusing our energies on the big thing. Should we talk about TypeScript?
We should.
Yeah.
By the time people hear this, we will have announced whatever we're going to announce. I've seen the PR. I haven't actually read it.
And I think anyone who's in any way involved with Svelte has probably got an inkling of what it is. But just, for official reasons, Rich, tell us what it is.
Svelte supports TypeScript.
What?
Oh my God.
Amazing.
Wait. I gotta break out the soundboard for this right now.
Did you actually get a soundboard?
Well, no, I just have to.
There we go.
Got it.
That's official.
Okay, there we go. Yay! All right. What does that mean?
So it means that you can write TypeScript inside your Svelte components, and you'll get type checking inside your script. So, like, caveat. Right now, this is mostly geared towards VS Code users, because that's where that's the main Svelte extension, is a VS Code extension, and it's built on top of a language server, which means that it's technically editor agnostic. But I think pretty much all of us are VS Code users, and a lot of our users are VS Code users. So that's where a lot of the initial energy has been focused. So if you're writing TypeScript inside a script block of a Svelte component, I think you need to have like lang equals TypeScript, or is it lang equals TS?
Either works.
Either works. Then you'll get all the usual type checking and auto completion and all of that stuff. And you'll also get auto completion and IntelliSense inside your markup, which is very cool. And if you import a Svelte component into a TypeScript component, which, I mean, typically you would only do that once in an app at the top level. You would import app from app.svelte and then instantiate it, but you'll get the type checking on that as well, because your TypeScript files now understand the Svelte component API.
It's also worth noting that none of the core maintainers are particularly large TypeScript users. I know that Svelte itself is written in TypeScript, but we don't tend to write a lot of front-end stuff in TypeScript. So we have to really give massive props to Auto here, who's kind of jumped on and sort of spearheaded this whole process, and the community around that, Dum-de-Dum, and I'm going to call people screen names because I can't remember everyone's names, but these people have produced an amazing amount of stuff to get TypeScript into production ready state. So really impressive.
So if you want to listen to more about TypeScript support, we did a podcast episode on this a couple of episodes back with both Orda and Simon on, so you can listen to that.
Yeah, my personal sort of perspective on that is that it's actually more than a TypeScript support. It's a language server that happens to support TypeScript. So it's this work is actually far bigger than mere TypeScript. I mean, that's a big deal. But I think maybe people don't appreciate how much work goes into general language support, because Svelte is a language, and Rich has a blog post on that. And essentially, this is an extension that gives you a better developer experience around that language, whether it's like checking the CSS class names. Like I saw this, I saw John Cooperman on Twitter say that he like lost 2 hours because he had like a mismatched CSS class name versus the one he actually used, and that just doesn't happen in Svelte. And you might have, and with a language server, you get advanced warning whether or not you use TypeScript. And I think that's something that Orda is trying to push as well, and that the fact that TypeScript tooling benefits you whether or not you actually use TypeScript. And so I think even people who don't necessarily care about TypeScript but care about developer experience may find this work useful. That's kind of why it's called language tools, I guess. And
yeah, and I think also it's worth noting that the way that it's been done, because it is via Svelte preprocess, that is an intentional decision that means that you don't need to have a rewrite of Svelte to support TypeScript. It's literally like Svelte is still kind of single language agnostic of any other language, and full TypeScript support can just be there as a result of having a preprocessor. So it's good.
That's
all I've got to say. It's good.
Yeah, I
didn't have to summarize that really.
I've got to eat humble pie a little bit, because I've been very skeptical about the preprocess API generally. Like, we sort of added it against me, saying, do we really want to have this? Like so many people were saying, we've got to have SCSS support and this, that, and the other. And I was always very skeptical because like that leads to fragmentation and it like adds all of these extra moving parts. But the fact that it's enabled Author and that team to do this it just completely proves me wrong about everything that I've ever said about pre-processing. It's great.
Sometimes Rich is wrong.
I'm frequently wrong.
I mean, I'm still sympathetic. I'm still sympathetic to the original view that like Svelte should stick as closely to HTML as possible. And every time we make one of these decisions, we step further away from the light. But I think we've always tried to kind of pitch Svelte as like a superset of HTML, and I think maybe that's permissible under that model.
I mean, it's still totally valid, right? That's it. It's still totally valid. The preprocessor allows you to put stuff that isn't necessarily valid in there, but the core is you can always write a Svelte component with basically no tooling at all. So it's.
I mean,
it's actually kind of funny. When I first started writing in Svelte, I immediately went for Sass, for example, because I thought, I need this. I always need this. So, but then like nowadays, I'm finding myself just writing plain CSS pretty much, and it's like that with a lot of things. I just go back to the basics. I rarely really use the.
Well, so one feature is the main thing I use, which is nesting. CSS still doesn't have nesting, right? So that's something.
So I find, so I used to use Sass a lot and I was quite keen on it, but then when it was possible for me to write styles that were scoped to a component, like I just no longer needed to use nesting, because nesting is a thing that I primarily used as a namespacing mechanism, and you don't need namespacing inside a component. So it was that, and it was variables, but we have CSS custom properties now. So like the two main reasons that I ever wanted to use Sass in the past are no longer applicable.
Yeah.
And I think that there's probably a lot of people who are sort of using this stuff out of muscle memory without stopping to think if it's still actually necessary.
Well, I mean, so for me, it's actually code organization. Like I can collapse an entire block and I don't have to worry about that block of CSS, but I can still, view the others.
How big are your components?
Right, exactly.
I just have a lot of styles. Like, wait, I don't know. Like if you just add a bunch of properties, that adds up.
Your components, they need more focus. This is a design pattern problem.
I will say, so I think it's a very nice thing to have both Tailwind and Svelte together. So Tailwind for the stuff that it normally handles, and then Svelte for the Svelte scope styles for the stuff that it doesn't handle. That seems to keep my custom CSS down by quite a bit. So that's really nice.
Cool.
Great. That's
Is it?
I'm gonna give some applause for the Svelte language and everyone working on it. There we go. We need some
that sounds more like a fish flopping around in a
it does, doesn't it?
In a pond.
We'll add some cheering in.
For clarity, that's people cheering.
Sorry, this is the DIY audio engineering.
People cheering.
Actually, so we have Sapper and Svelte GL. Shall we flip that? Because Sapper, I guess, is bigger on people's minds.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. What's going on with Sapper?
Big question.
Do you want to take this, Anthony?
Well, I'll tell you what I know, but it's sort of, I guess the general consensus is Sapper is an opinionated app builder, right? However, it's become apparent that maybe we don't really know what it is. We don't know what people want it to be, and it doesn't know what it is. So there's a notion perhaps of maybe modularizing it. So definitely pulling apart a router, maybe using the file-based router that's in Sapper right now as the official Svelte router. But then also maybe looking at, is it actually a bunch of roll-up plugins and not a framework in its own right? Or is it a bunch of modules that produce a thing called Sapper that can each be individually used and various parts pulled out? It's still up in the air. There's still a lot of discussion around what it is and what it isn't. But I would say that the API won't change too dramatically from what it is now, but what I would say is that the actual architecture of what Sapper is inside might change. And one advantage of that, for instance, that's immediately apparent is reducing the dependency on the way that it's bundled. Because right now you've got kind of Webpack and you've got Rollup stuck in there at the same time. They're very deeply embedded in the framework, and it makes things like HMR a lot harder in Sapper than it is in Svelte. So I don't know. The answer is I don't know. We don't know, but definitely big things, and happy to hear from the community what they think Sapper should be and what's useful to them. Rich, maybe you can make that clear and cohesive.
Yeah, I mean, I love this idea of Sapper becoming bundler plugins rather than like that control being inverted. I haven't quite wrapped my mind around what that would look like in terms of the code, and whether it's possible to have the server component and the client component be separate from each other when they need to be quite tightly coupled in various ways. Like the client is expecting to hydrate certain markup, and it's expecting to have certain preloaded data available to it, and so there's a lot of open questions that need some resolution, but there's a lot of really good ideas that are floating around, and I think there's also a lot of really good ideas that we can steal from other frameworks. Some people have asked questions like, can we have mixed mode exporting where some pages that are static are exported and some are dynamically server rendered and stuff like that. And we need to figure out our story around deploying to various different services, make that a bit more turnkey. There's a lengthy roadmap. Yes, the long running config issue.
So for background on the config issue, just quickly, the config issue is that people are it seems people are yearning for a config. We haven't really fast forwarded that yet, even though it's kind of, there's PRs for it and there's designs and stuff, because maybe config isn't the right answer based on where we want this to go or where we want it to end up. And if we commit to it now, then we're kind of stuck with it. It becomes, we're committing our future selves to something when we don't really know what the architecture of Sapper is.
So when you're talking configs, you're talking about pretty much moving things that are currently in the rollup config sort of out of it into separate config.
That and
kind of ish
flags that you pass to the CLI.
Yeah. Okay.
At the moment, if you have a base path, for example, you have to pass in -- base path and stuff like that, and that probably does belong in a config file of some sort. I've always been a little bit hesitant about config files for like the reason that Anthony said, like you are committing yourself, but also because they tend to become a little bit of a dumping ground, and they make it easier for you to have a flabbier API, which maybe isn't the best reason not to have one, but if we do this, then we need to do it with our eyes wide open.
For just a quick question on the tooling side of things. So for those who may not be paying too close attention to the tooling side, Rich also is responsible for Rollup, and I think there's some work going on with Rollup. I think the Google devs, Jake and Surma, have also started an initiative to update some of the. I guess at least put all the bundlers on par. Is there some level of maybe these problems are better solved at the rollup level than at Sapper? Once we solve them at rollup, then we'll fix them at the Sapper level, or are they kind of completely independent movements?
There definitely are some problems that fall into that category, like CSS code splitting, for example.
Right.
At the moment, Sapper is responsible for CSS code splitting, and the code that makes it happen is just filthy. But if that was something that a bundler could do automatically, then it would make life a lot easier. Like Vite, I will note, does do CSS code splitting. I'm not exactly sure what the mechanism is, but that's a thing that exists, and people have been playing around with a combination of Vite and Svelte. There's Svite, SVITE, which I kind of like. And it's not inconceivable that a future version of Sapper would be based off something like that instead of Rollup. Like Vite uses Rollup under the hood for the production build, but when you're developing, there's no bundler involved at all. And I know there's been talk about using NoLup instead of rollup at development time, which is kind of a similar idea, but from like it's been going a lot longer. So like all of these questions about how these things fit together are kind of up in the air, because the front end generally is sort of up in the air at the moment about like what our relationship to bundlers is. Snowpack and Vite have really shaken things up. And I think we would be foolish to bury our heads in the sand and ignore those developments.
How about should we talk about, okay, so like with Sapper is like a bundle of so many things, right? We have routing, we have suspense. I kind of threw in suspense in there just because like that's an issue that kind of is related to other frameworks, ideas from other frameworks that we can steal, and hydration. Which of these should we tackle first?
Well, there's the router, which is an easy one, right?
I don't know. Is that easy?
Well, so the router was a sort of a semi-official announcement, right? That there would now be plans due to community demand to produce a router. We already have a router, the one in Sapper, the file-based router. Obviously, file-based routing is not everyone's cup of tea, but it gives us a good basis from which to start, right? So I say an easy one. It's somewhere where there's definitely like a direction we can start off in. It's not like a massive open question.
Right.
Makes sense.
Yeah. The ideal, I think we discussed this very briefly a while back. The ideal would be to have an official router that Sapper could use. Like maybe the file system is the input to the router. Like you call the router with the contents of some representation of the file system, and it turns into a full-fledged router. The sticking point, as far as I can see, is that on the client side, you want to be able to lazy load your routes, but that means that you've got to be able to import things asynchronously. And on the server side, we don't have an asynchronous render method. So I think we would maybe need to think about streaming or async server-side rendering so that we could accommodate dynamic imports for routing, if we were to have a universal router like that, like a component-based router, I mean. So this is one of those things where like you start out with something that seems like a really obvious and good idea, and suddenly you've opened this massive can of worms and need to spend the next several months figuring out your design for asynchronous rendering. But I think we should have that. I mean, I think that would be a useful thing to have in its own right.
Okay, that's routing. It's a complicated topic. In React itself, I know we've had a lot of churn as well on the routing side, so not at all an easy thing. But like I think I agree with the general proposition that it seems like a good thing for the ecosystem, especially
people have spoken.
Yeah, Vue definitely does a good job of just keeping it first party, and yeah, that's a nice thing to have. Should we talk about hydration?
It's quite nice to be. Yeah, let's do it.
I don't know anything about this hydration stuff, so this is all you.
Well, there's
Rich,
a few.
Me?
Yeah, and there's you might be close to the specifics right now, but there's a few issues with how hydration currently works. Number one, it's not as fast as it could be. I think there's probably some ways that we can speed things up. Number two, there are some bugs. Like if you have a CSS animation running on some server rendered content and then you hydrate that, then the CSS animation will restart, which is obviously no bueno. So we need to fix those issues. But there's also this larger question about incremental hydration and selective hydration, which is to say that if you've got a very big page with lots of content and you hydrate it, then that chokes the main thread for what could become a noticeable amount of time. And so it would be nice if there was a way of doing that in stages instead of doing it all at once. It would also be nice if when you have parts of the application that are fully static, that you don't need to hydrate those at all, that they just sort of stay on the page and don't do anything. And these are all very difficult, hairy technical questions that will take some careful design.
I was going to ask, isn't this one of those issues that haven't really been solved? Like in general, in the front
Well,
end?
I harp on a lot about, I try not to, but I harp on a lot about web components because I think they have some fatal flaws in their design, and that by and large, they're not suitable for app development. However, they do have an answer to this question of selective hydration, which is that if you have an element on the page that is a custom element that has some markup and some styles, then it will only hydrate once JavaScript kicks in, and like all the rest of your static HTML is just left alone. The downside, of course, is that until the hydration happens, if you have any shadowed on content, then nothing will happen at all. But they have sort of created a benchmark that those of us like in the framework in the web component skeptic framework land should try and aim for.
Right, I was going to say.
I think
well, I'll go ahead with my thing. Just quickly, this is something I think Rich touched upon this in his essay on the In Defense of the Modern Web. I think that's something that we're all thinking about, maybe, with like the stuff that we have to get better at as framework people. The other thing I'll sort of bring up, which I've kind of felt suspense thrown in there, is that React is kind of actively looking at suspense to do this work. In a sense of like, you can suspend indefinitely until you actually need to load that JavaScript. I think that's what they're trying to do. And it's not unsolved in the sense that there are working demos that you can go and look up where they show incremental hydration and I forget the other term for it, selective hydration. I think it's based on like whether it's in the window or like your mouse is hovering over it. And so we might need to like provide a few different triggers for that, but I don't think they're going to be that many. It's just like, is it rendered or not? And then is it in the window or is your mouse on it? Those are the three levels of, selecting your hydration.
Yeah. I just wanted to actually mention that the PRs that are open, because people have solved the hydration issue. They have said, this is how you do it, that tear down the DOM. And it looks like we're just kind of sitting on them and kind of ignoring them, but we're not. So the reason they haven't been accepted and merged straight away is because, again, it solves a corridor case problem, but it doesn't solve the wider problem in that Svelte's actually quite generous about what it will and won't hydrate. It doesn't mandate this perfect structure that it can rehydrate. It is quite lenient in terms of that. So whilst these will solve that major case, they will then break those cases where people are using it with even non-Svelte generated SSR code. So just wanted to mention that.
And I think those cases are more common than people generally acknowledge. I very often will have, for example, buttons that are disabled until hydration is complete. And so just a minor thing like that, if you assume that the markup that comes from the server is good to go, then you're going to end up with a broken application. Not to mention anything that involves like timestamps or anything of that nature. Like if you have a post that was posted 3 minutes ago when it was server rendered, but by the time it gets to the client, it's 4 minutes ago, then like, hey, you've got a broken app. We've got to be able to accommodate those cases.
Cool. Just I don't know how whether or not people care about this thing or not, but you brought it up yourself with opening an issue about Svelte suspense. Like, does that actually mean like a heavier runtime as far as Svelte is concerned?
It would do if we were to implement it, because we would need to change the update model slightly. At the moment, when a component updates, it just goes ahead and updates the DOM immediately. And we would need to switch to an approach where it was storing those updates in a list and then applying them after the fact. And so that I've sort of dabbled with some imaginary pseudocode to see what this would look like. And it would involve generating slightly more code, which, we want to avoid in the general case. But it would also enable some other things like error boundaries and stuff, which we don't really do at the moment. So it might be worth looking at that. More broadly, though, I am a little skeptical about suspense. I think we need to wait and see how it plays out in practice before we commit to suspense. Sapper has something rather suspense-like in the form of preload functions. The things that you want to use suspense for generally, which is deferring some kind of navigation, we can do that at the page level with Sapper already, and that serves like 80 or 90% of the use cases for suspense that I've seen described in the wild. Meanwhile, I see people who are wrestling with beta versions of React, trying to get suspense working, and it's causing them no end of confusion and pain, because the mental model is just so different when you're working in that world. And so I'm not entirely convinced that it's the right direction for frameworks to go in. But I could easily be proven wrong.
Yeah. It's a very evolving field, and nobody really knows until we just try it out. Perfect.
It's quite nice to be late to the party on this sort of thing, Same with routers, right? Because you get the prior investigation of every other framework out there.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of like the Svelte's way of being, right? Is we want to include as much stuff as possible, but because we're a small volunteer team, we don't have the benefit of React, for example, because they have this huge community, this huge ecosystem. And React itself has always been, we're going to have this very small focus in the library itself, and then you go off and build React Router and React Spring and React this, React that, and then the best solutions will rise like cream to the top. But then they don't integrate them into the framework itself, so you get this constant churn. Whereas we've always said, like, we want to include this stuff in the framework itself, but we don't have the ability to do that amount of investigation. So I think if we can do what you describe, let the community reach the best possible solutions and then integrate the best ones into the framework, then it might take us a little bit longer, but ultimately I think that's the best of both worlds.
Awesome.
And this is kind of how the case for like Svelte pre-process and the TypeScript stuff. It's all been community projects that have been brought into the fray as well. So it's quite nice in that respect.
Yeah, and one day I'd love to add Svelte native to that list.
Yeah, absolutely.
I still haven't really tried it out more than like a simple application, but from what I understand, it's pretty well done. Like you can. Yeah, like you could for sure make production ready apps for it.
I'm completely ignorant about this, but like, how much is done by native scripts and how much is done by the Svelte side of things?
Couldn't tell you. I have no idea.
I've never actually poked the code either, but my understanding is that it's basically Svelte component running on top of native script. So native script is providing like a fake DOM essentially. And the components themselves are basically unchanged.
Cool. Awesome. Should we talk about the other additions to Svelte, Svelte GL?
Sure.
Okay.
The sad child that we never get to, but we always mean to get to it, but we never
yeah. So I have a very bad habit of building things that I need at work and then thinking, oh, this could be useful to other people too, and then sort of throwing them over the wall in a somewhat incomplete state.
It's fine.
And imagining that somehow I'm going to find time to finish them and polish them up and add documentation and all of these other things. And so that's true of Svelte GL. It's also true of Pancake, my charting library. And all I can say is I'm sorry. I would love to spend more time doing Svelte
anyone
GL
is free.
It's really... Well, yeah, but the trouble is with something like Svelte GL is getting the API right is it's not straightforward. And I think there are a lot of problems in open source that can be solved by just throwing people at them. But API design for something that is in a bit of an experimental state is not one of those things. It needs some dedication from like a small number of people who kind of have understood the problem space, and I'm still in the process of understanding the problem space. So I mean, I guess if there are people out there who are pretty familiar with 3D graphics and have used things like 3 or other WebGL libraries and have a really good grasp of the concepts involved, then maybe we should make it a bit more of a collaborative thing. But until then, it has been a little bit neglected, and that's on me.
Okay, just to, if let's say I'm one of those people listening, and I have some background and I have some interest, and I gotta go to the repo, like where do I start? Where do I just file an issue saying like, here I am, like, I'm ready to discuss stuff?
I guess, yeah, or yell at me on Twitter.
Okay.
So
do we have a GL part of the Discord? We do. Okay,
we
there is.
do.
Maybe that's a bit misleading at some point, like making it more showing up as more like active than it actually is.
No,
I think there should be a
place. We need a place to chat about it.
Yeah, there is a GL channel in the Discord.
Yeah.
I haven't did it in a while, but it's actually quite active.
It looks.
Yeah.
It looks like this Goblin King guy's all over it.
Yeah, he's doing like an MMORPG, right?
What?
Yeah.
And so I think it's really cool.
Cool.
I guess the final boss is going to be the Goblin King.
Yeah. That kind of makes sense. So this kind of brings me to another question. So you said you usually do stuff on, like, stuff you do for work. You might realize, oh, someone else might need this. So what are you currently working at that might for someone else in the future?
The stuff that I'm working on at work at the moment it's very NYT specific. For the last several months, I've been working on our coronavirus tracker project, which is a thing that got started early this year when the pandemic was first blowing up. There wasn't a good single authoritative place where you could track the rising cases and deaths around the world, largely because our own government wasn't doing a great job of making this data available. And so what began as a fairly modest spreadsheet-driven effort with a few maps and charts has since ballooned into this thing with dozens and dozens of different pages. We have a page for every state in the US. We have a page for numerous countries around the world. We have a world page. We have a USA page in Spanish, plus various pages tracking testing data and all these other things. And so I'm part of a team, like a huge team, a team that's bigger than most newsrooms in the US, of developers and designers and reporters who are trying to provide that authoritative data source. And I'm working on the publishing end of that, like trying to figure out how we, can actually keep these pages updated several times a day. And the pages, they use Svelte quite heavily. They use Pancake, and they use other things, but there hasn't been any development in any of those things as a result of the project. All of the development has been on getting our publishing system to behave with a project of this magnitude, because normally it's for single one-off articles and stuff, and we're pushing it to its limits.
Yeah, it's almost a new site, it's a dedicated app for this issue. And
yeah, well, we compare it to our election coverage, because
which you're also going to have this year.
Yeah, well, we already do, because like there's elections happening all the time. The big one obviously is going to be in November, but between now and then there's a bunch of other stuff. And the election app is a thing that powers dozens of pages across the site, and there's a bunch of components that are shared between all of them, but then some of them are specific to specific pages. And so like you have this big management problem of how do you orchestrate all of these different things. And the coronavirus pandemic is very similar to that in terms of how we approach the project.
Awesome.
Cool. That is
Important work.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the COVID thing is crazy.
All right. Do we have any last few
Well, we got
questions?
we got a couple of topics on Pancake and Melina. I think Pancake is kind of like the same boat. Is pretty much.
Yeah, I think we've covered Pancake.
Yeah. Do we? What's the call to action for Pancake? What do people want? What does Rich want?
Documentation. I made a very small start on building some documentation, but I never got around to deploying it. And that is mostly because we need it for internal use. Like my co-workers building things with it, like always having to ask me questions about how it all fits together. And if we had some documentation and examples, then that would help. So I just need to get the ball rolling on that, and then that would be a thing that I think people could contribute to, and that would be broadly appreciated. Yeah, that's it. Docs.
Will this ever be on the level of like an official library, like an official Svelte library, or will it always be sort of third party?
I think it could. Well, so it's on NPM. It's released under the Svelte namespace.
Oh.
But I don't know if it would be elevated to the point of being like a subdomain on svelte.dev or something like that. I think there's room for multiple different takes on the problem of charting. Like Pancake is purely about like it's basically just about managing Cartesian scales. That's all there is to it. Like it doesn't do pie charts. It doesn't do lots of other things that you might expect from a charting library. It's really column charts, bar charts, line charts, scatter plots, stuff like that. So there are other things that have that support a much broader array of chart types. Like my coworker Michael Keller maintains
Layer Cake,
a library called Layer Cake, which does all of the things Pancake does, but a lot of other stuff as well. So, I wouldn't necessarily say that like one of those should become the official charting framework. I think there's room for different ones.
So Melina, what is it? It's from what I understand, it's supposed to make like the reactivity a bit more native-like. Is that a good description?
Yeah. So there's a blog post that I've read a couple of times, and I haven't sort of weighed in on this thing yet because I really want to understand what it's doing and how it works before I form an opinion. It sounds great. Like it looks really cool. It compares some generated code between Svelte and Melina, and the Melina code is doing some smart things like generating HTML and then grabbing child nodes from it instead of programmatically constructing the DOM tree, which means that the generated code is smaller for a lot of things. There's a couple of design decisions that I'm not totally sure about, like it changes the event handling syntax slightly, but basically it's like a almost Svelte clone that generates smaller code and has more reactivity features. Like you can push to arrays and that will cause an update immediately. And it looks great, but as I say, I want to try and understand it better first. Because like I don't know what it's not doing, right? Svelte has a gazillion features that are probably not present in this thing because it's quite new, and it's conceivable that some of the design choices that it's made are incompatible with some Svelte features. So yeah, need to understand it better.
Yeah, and I also haven't had a huge look at it, but I've seen some discussions about it, and I think one of the big sort of potential bugbears, again, without really understanding how it works, is that it shifts a lot of that reactivity into the digest loop on the client side. So it's doing something that's more akin to like what Angular might do or React might do versus what Svelte might do. Svelte being a thing that wires things up in the compile before compilation. Again, it's not something I completely understand, but that's what I understand from what the current sort of analysis of it has been. There's another one called Svelte M. I'm not sure what the relation between the two is, but it seems to be very similar.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, the same guy wrote Melina and Svelte, and I think it's just a rebrand, maybe.
Wait, he wrote a Svelte competitor called Svelte?
No, well, Svelte M.
So I think the Svelte M thing was just to show like some reactivity stuff, like, oh, look at this, if you only do this, you can push to arrays.
Yeah,
I agree with
something
that.
Like
I think that's probably like the first thing that I ran into, and that's a big problem. But I don't know, you just learn to deal with it. But maybe he's showing a better way, you know.
Well, yeah. I think the thing is they're both almost pitched as a set by the author. They're pitched as a set of optimizations that Svelte could incorporate.
Yeah.
They're not designed to compete directly. People have taken it on and started promoting it as a direct competitor in a kind of way that's saying that we would never have these optimizations and this is going to take over and it's going to be the future, which is not, I think, what the original author's intention was. It's a bit of a wild thing, but yeah, it's not like we don't want to optimize Svelte in any way. It's just that it has to be properly assessed because, as Rich says, neither of these, well, Melina, let's say, doesn't do anything like what Svelte does. It's a very, very small set of things. It's cherry-picked certain things it thinks are suboptimal in Svelte and optimized those. And we don't know whether the optimization that's been done is sensible or not, or whether it worked with any of the other stuff. So it's an ongoing investigation, and obviously, like, it'd be interesting to hear more from the author and about the design decisions and stuff too. So who knows?
By the way,
maybe
I
I'll
think
have a guest on the podcast one day.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
There's some benchmark numbers here that show Melina being quite a bit faster than Svelte at certain tasks, and I think this is an amazing way to contribute to a framework, is to say you could be doing these things in a completely different way. Like if you were to do that as a pull request, then you would have, it would be a much bigger task, right? Because like you need to change the entire workings, and you need to rewrite entire chunks of the framework while making all of the existing tests pass. But if you can just sort of create a new thing from scratch and say, what if we'd gone down this road instead, then you can prove an idea without the massive overhead of contributing to the framework directly. So I definitely approve of the existence of this thing. I just don't yet have an opinion on the what's going on under the hood yet, and I want to.
Wonderful. Yeah, this is really impressive work.
Yeah. All right. I think that was our last topic, I think.
Well,
do we want to do picks? Does everyone have a pick?
I can go.
My picks.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, no, I was going to say my pick is listed below, so I'm not going to have a pick because I think we'll cover it anyway.
Sure. We seem to have the same picks from last time. Oh, okay. Well, I'll just write my own picks. So I've been experiencing. So I wrote 100,000 word book over 2 months, and that was a lot of typing. And I started to get some RSI, and and so I think we have to preserve our fingers, because that's the primary way in which we express our code until Elon Musk finishes his Neuralink project, and then we just plug into the matrix. So I've got the Microsoft Sculpt, and it's this keyboard that's kind of slopes the other way. So a lot of keyboards slope upwards, and that's actually bad. Oh, Anthony has one.
There it is.
It's really changed my mind on how good sort of wireless keyboards can be, and mice. Especially how with everything, like the way that you remove the covers, it just uses magnets, so it just kind of sticks together nicely. There's all these little touches which, like, people have been raving about it. I'm a late adopter for sure, but I tried it out. I have some money from work to buy some equipment, and I'm loving it so far. And my tip is, so I did a bunch of research into RSI, so you can find out on my site my notes on RSI. And one of the tips is you don't want to do like this, like with your hands up like that. You always want to kind of suspend it, and that's why people use wrist rests. Unfortunately, like the experience of wrist rest isn't very good. So what I've done is I put the keyboard inside of a drawer, and I rest my hands on the drawer. So I'm always suspended and typing the right way. And it's working well. It's working well. Yeah. It might cut off my circulation. It might cut off my circulation for a bit, but then I just move more.
It's worth noting actually. Another advantage of this keyboard is because when you type on a regular keyboard, your wrists are like, you can't see on an audio podcast, but you can see on the video one maybe. That your hands are like this, but with this keyboard, it forces a more natural angle. And I think that for me, because I used to get like twinges and stuff, that solved all of that. I haven't had a single twinge in years since having this keyboard.
Yeah. All right. I have a pick. So I recently got a Raspberry Pi 4, and I decided to install something called Matrix on it.
Cool.
Which is like a, I don't know, peer-to-peer not really peer-to-peer, but some kind of encrypted chat service. So I'm looking at moving away from like using any kind of like services run by companies. Getting tired of privacy issues. It's just a fun tinkering project, really. So I would recommend getting a Raspberry Pi, I think.
I've had one. It's definitely good for small hacking stuff. I just like, if it shuts down, I have no way of knowing. So I tend to default to the cloud if I can.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I have a bunch of them around the house. They are pretty cool. I think the only ones that I've had anything on long term is I've got one upstairs and one downstairs, but basically for a project called I think what's it called? It's not Audacity. It's some audiophile music project, but it's like having a Sonos in your house that only costs like $30 or whatever. Streams to your existing speakers, uses a DAC on the Pi, so it's got like supreme audio quality, and you can stream and you can do Spotify cast from your phone and stuff.
You should write about this. This sounds good. It sounds really.
I try and remember the name of it. I'll find it quickly. Whilst Rich, have you got a pick? Because I can find the name of this one whilst you're doing yours.
I have a pick. So it's summer in New York City, and that means there's lots of flies about. I have a device here called the Executioner, and it looks like a tennis racket.
It's actually called the Executioner.
Yeah, I'll hold this up to the webcam.
Yeah, that's his real name. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's a few different models similar to this that you can get that sort of resemble tennis rackets, but this one is orders of magnitude more powerful than anyone that I've used before, to the extent that if you actually manage to make contact with a fly, then if it's small enough, it will just instantly vaporize with a very satisfying crack. And so despite being intensely worried about the impending insect apocalypse, I love my Executioner. It's keeping me sane.
What kind of flies and mosquitoes do you have over there?
We certainly have plenty of mosquitoes. I had fruit flies. I made the mistake of buying a pineapple from Trader Joe's, and my flat was full of fruit flies for the next week. So don't do that. Just like normal flies that you get living in a gross city like New York.
So I also have the Executioner downstairs as well, and I will say that if you look what it does close up, if you hit a fly with it, you got those really annoying flies fly around. It literally blows their wings off. It's like, I can't imagine what that must feel like to a fly. I mean, obviously they've got a system inside, but their wings just go poof. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. It does work, surprisingly enough. Yeah.
Well, y'all need to just.
I remember the. Yeah. The name of my project that I was talking about is Volumio. So it's like Volume.io. And it's like a little Node.js app.
Oh, that's free and open source.
Yeah, they should, but it is, and it's amazing. It's equivalent to a Sonos, but a lesser walled garden. So I really, really like it. I think it's a great project.
Rich, this looks like your type of thing. You like the audio?
Yeah. What's the URL?
Yeah, it's cool.
Volumio.
Volumio.org.
It's in the chat. Cool.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I spelled it wrong the first time.
Yeah, it's very cool. It does multi-room now as well. So you can choose a room on your phone and direct to a room you want to play music in. It's pretty cool.
I should check this out as well.
Awesome.
Now I just need to have a paid big enough to make it worthwhile.
Yeah. They have a paid plan as well, but the free one is everything barring some plugins and stuff. So it's really good.
All right.
I think that's it for our chat with Rich. Thanks so much for coming on our show.
Thanks for coming on,
Rich.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
thanks for working on Svelte.
See you guys.
All right, we're gonna shut down. So there we go. That's
oh, nice.